Yeah, I got involved in this project, first of all through Fox Searchlight, because we just finished filming The Favourite. And they sent me this script and asked me to meet with Dome, and I sat and met with Dome and was just really, I mean, I loved the script, but then seeing his take and understanding of the story and feeling his energy, and I was like, wow, this is the right person to bring this story to life. And it was just something that I thought could be a really wonderful take on and learning, you know, the story behind this great artist who's given us kind of this wonderful mythology. I was fairly familiar with his work. I had read The Hobbit after filming About a Boy, because the Whites brothers, the directors of that film, gave me a copy of that book. And then I'd read a bit of The Lord of the Rings. I'd watched the films and was a big fan of those, and then played the card game after school. I'd stay behind after school and play the card game. So I like loved the world and understood that, but then really didn't know anything about the man behind those stories. And that was what was incredible. I read the script, and it was a beautiful story, standalone on its own, of these friendships and love, and this young orphan boy who kind of found his safe place to create, and then how that was all torn away from him through World War I. But also as a fan, I was like, oh, this is where all that inspiration came from. First of all, I was just in awe of everything that he experienced and what a fascinating life he had, because that was something that I was like, oh wow, even if he hadn't created these things that have become such a part of the zeitgeist, it was one of those things where I was like, this is just a beautiful story, and the life he lived was remarkable. So then it was that, and then also his love of language was something that I didn't realize that's what stemmed all these worlds. You know, him wanting to create languages, and his mother kind of distilling that passion in him, but then learning and developing and realizing that you can't just create a language without people to speak it, and then a history for that language. So then suddenly from that he creates, you know, Middle Earth. Well, this is the period of his life, those formative years where you're most influenced, I think, in life. And they're kind of, later on, it'll be a lot more about the work and his time in Oxford as a professor, but this is him having to grow up very quickly when he was a young boy, and then finding his safe place and the people that inspired him. Edith, played by Lily Collins in the movie, is the love of his life. They inspired the Beren and Luthien tale, and you know, they meet in very similar circumstances. They're both orphans, kind of in care together, and instantly fall in love, and have this connection and understanding. And there's a real spark and fun and cheekiness to their relationship. But then, because of the circumstances, they can't always be together, but then do reunite, and it's just the kind of heartbeat of the film. The friendship, you know, it's particularly with losing his parents at such a young age, he kind of then has to start at a new school, which is a daunting prospect for anyone. But he discovers this group of boys that then name themselves the TCBS, which stands for the Tea Club and Barovian Society. And they're this group of young boys who are all very creative. They're poets and musicians and painters, and they all get together and kind of band together with this idea of creating art to change the world. And that's something that post-World War I and Tolkien kind of losing all those friendships, he really takes on board as kind of a healing process, and realizes, you know, just how important art can be in trying times. Lily's wonderful to work with. She's fun and inspiring, and she sits there and she's very detailed with her ideas. Her attention to detail is remarkable, and what she picks up on in terms of, you know, finding and creating the character of Edith and making her really multidimensional, and the force and driving power and the spark between them and her and Tolkien. Dome is wonderful. Dome is when I first sat with him, that's what kind of triggered me to be like, this is the right person with this script. He completely understands every emotional aspect of the story and what Tolkien's going through as a character, as well as the other characters. His love of language, his knowledge of that. He'd already read the Kalevala and speaks Finnish, which is a big influence on Tolkien. And then also just creatively, he's someone that his vision in terms of creating World War I and how he wanted to shoot the film and the tone and how he wanted to make it feel was just something that I felt like was very original and creative. It's very exciting. Just as a fan, it's something that I feel that other people will really enjoy, because it's something that I was intrigued by and learned so much. And I think there's lovely little Easter eggs in there for fans, and then there's also these through stories for people that aren't so familiar with his work, just in terms of a standalone story. So yeah, it's something that I would like to watch. The film is about a young boy who loses his family and then has to kind of find a new one and finds a safe place to create. It's about love and fellowship and creativity and all those things combined. So then those are the kind of the key aspects to this movie. I think people will just enjoy watching kind of these relationships develop, have a little insight into a genius and his process. And then also I think that hopefully come away feeling like inspired to maybe go and create their own ideas and see just how art can change the world.
I got involved with the project through my agent. He sent me the script and said, this is something I think that is very much up your street. It's based on the life of J.R.R. Tolkien. We know that you love fantasy. We know you love Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. And I had actually auditioned for one of the other films for an elven character, and so they knew that I had an affinity for that kind of role. And I spoke with Dome, and right away his passion and it was quite infectious, and his knowledge about the material was so present that I became even more excited. And then when I heard that Nick was involved, it was kind of a no-brainer. So all in all, it was something that I knew right away I wanted to be a part of. I've always loved magic. I've always loved fantasy in this kind of a world, and the books when I was in school were very much a part of the literature of the time, and being like a kid who was already predisposed to loving fantasy, it was very much something I was aware of. And of course, when the Peter Jackson movies came out, I would go to the theater and see them, look forward to the release of the next one every time. So it was something that was very much ingrained in me from a very young age. And so to be a part of this story finally about the man himself felt quite right in a way. I'm always someone who enjoys knowing the story behind the story, so the fact that Tolkien himself was quite rambunctious and cheeky and playful, as was Edith, and so much of his experiences in war and his friendship, his school days, his love with Edith, all of that is so much a part of the characters he created and the world he created. And I think that the unexpected nature of all those relationships is what's really exciting and appealing about what he then created, and like the marriage of how we did it in the film with images or color, and you're kind of seeing all these unexpected influences, I think makes watching those other movies now, going back to like the Peter Jackson of it all and reading the books again, even more interesting, because you know the nature of where they came from. And I think it's important to see him not as just an old man writing at a desk. I think having a playful quality makes him a more full-rounded human being, and I think it's unexpected. I mean, he was a kid once. He was obviously someone that created these kinds of stories, had to love adventure and storytelling himself, so I think it's only natural to see him like that. I loved that they were each other's true loves from a very young age. When they met in the orphanage, became fast friends, confidants, very much each other's inspiration and encouragers of sorts, a sense of escape. They both saw something in each other that the other one maybe needed more encouragement of, and she saw a sense of escape in his storytelling. He saw a sense of escape with her because she was this very muse-like influence for him. And I really think it's a story that a lot of people might say, oh, that's just a love for the movies. But in fact, it was their love story, and it's true. And you see these photos, very few photos of them together, but the photos that you do see, there's just this ever youthful love and cheekiness about them that lasted all throughout their lives. And I think it's kind of like the epic love that everyone wants to attain, and these two were able to do it. Nick is just awesome. Nick, his work ethic is so incredible. He's so fun to be in a scene with because he's just the ultimate scene partner. He will improv with you if that's what it calls for. He will be super respectful of every moment and let it kind of live and breathe. Like, these characters really say so much sometimes without saying physically anything, and he's just so present. He's just like Dome and him together are so passionate and excited, and so it's impossible not to be as excited as them when you're doing a scene. And he just embodied that the intellect and the storytelling aspect, but then also just the super playful, youthful qualities as well. Dome is very actor-driven in his directing style. He seems to know exactly what to say to each individual in order to get exactly what it is that he wants from them. He's super excited and passionate, whether it's shooting a war sequence or a lovely scene in the woods dancing elven style. It doesn't matter what we're shooting, he is as excited and passionate, which just rubs off on the whole cast and crew. And what I loved is that, like, the first time we spoke, he explained his use of color and how he was going to mix the fantasy in with the realness of that time period. And I could see it, but I thought, well, now I just hope that it actually comes across. And when I saw the final cut, it was actually someone who had said something and then delivered. You know, it was a really nice payoff because it felt beautiful shooting it, but it looks so stunning as well. And the way that he molded and moved all these kind of storylines into one seemed almost impossible, and he made it happen.
When I first read the script, I made me realize that I knew nothing about the life of Tolkien. I knew all of his work, and I'm a fan of him as a writer, but to find out that he lived such an incredible life was really special. And then to see the relationships that he had with the TCBS was something that I just couldn't not be a part of.
I immediately made sort of connections with other films that I'd seen, one being The Dead Poets Society that was mentioned before in the previous interview. A group of young men who want to discuss and talk about art and push each other to be the best that they can be. I loved that. I think that's very rare today. So I just kind of wanted to live in that little world for a while.
You know, when I thought of Tolkien, I would think of him as, you know, an old professor, being all over these books and stuff. And when I read this film, I realized that he was just a young rebel. The guy was stealing buses. You know, he had an insatiable appetite for life, creating languages, and I just really wanted to be a part of a film.
I think it was vital for someone like Tolkien, who'd had the upbringing that he'd had, to have that sort of unbreakable bond and unit in his life that he could go to and fall back on, and they could support him, they could test him, they could annoy him. I think him being a part of the TCBS taught him a lot about life.
Yeah, so I played Jeffrey Smith, one of the members of the TCBS, and he feels that Tolkien is a kindred spirit. I think he meets him when he's alone. I think Jeffrey often feels very alone, and sort of extends the olive branch, you know, wants to invite him into the little crew that they've already got.
I play Christopher Wiseman, who is a young composer, mathematician, linguist, who is probably out of the four of the TCBS, he's the one with the least. He doesn't have a filter, is what I'm trying to say. It just all flows out of him, and he is very jealous of Tolkien. He's also, I think, a little bit aware of being outdone by people. There's a few scenes where Robert sort of tests Christopher, and he's not sure how to deal with it. He doesn't like to be on the back foot. So yeah, he has the ingredients in that group to make it a little tense now and again. But it's a lot of the time with love, and I think the boys love him for that.
And I play Robert Gilson, who is one of the members of the TCBS as well. And his dad was the principal at King Edward's, where they all went to school and met initially. And I think Robert, when he first meets Tolkien, he's they're sort of at odds a little bit. But then I think Robert really recognizes a similar thing within Tolkien, which is a sort of outsider quality, and a need for acceptance and a need for this brotherhood, and they become this wonderful group that they are.
I think Nick's just one of those really human actors. You know, you just really feel, he just lets you in. You watch him on screen, and I don't feel like there's any pretense. You just are drawn to him, and
a very likable quality.
Yeah, amazing, unreal. Dome was just the best crack ever.
I've never met a man with so
insane.
much energy.
Yeah.
And flair for life and filmmaking. And he just lives and breathes it. That man is just, it's in his DNA. And you could tell he was like a kid in the sweet shop when we were on set. He was just like, okay, let's get another one. And we'd get all the material that he wanted. And then it looked like he'd had 15 coffees when he hadn't had one.
He quit
off
caffeine.
sugar.
Yeah, he stayed off sugar, caffeine, but still he was like, the whole time.
That was it. That was literally.
And he was like, you know, we'd get all the material and then he'd go, right, okay, let's get one more. This one's just for you. Fly it around, play around with it. Let's see what happens. And usually that was the best take.
Yeah.
He gave us that freedom to explore and to have fun and to not be worried about looking stupid.
Yeah, he wanted us to mess it up because so much goodness came out of that.
Well, I'm a Tolkien fan, and I started reading the books since the age of 12, 13. Lord of the Rings was the first one, then Hobbit, then Silmarillion, and then Leaf by Nickel, so many of his books. And so that's kind of grown into me, and it's actually shaped me somehow of the storyteller who I am, kind of trying to tell stories of outsiders, telling stories about different worlds, and kind of finding a home is a theme that I often have in my films. And then the second thing was just that I thought I just did a biopic earlier. I thought I'm going to do a biopic in a while, and I kind of were like hesitant about it. But I opened the story and found out how cinematic it is. You know, the beautiful story of friendship and love, and he actually experienced so many elements in his own life that are in the books, and it's epic in an emotional scale. And after that, it just felt that it has to be done.
So really, when you read the script, it really jumped out straight at you, and you could see quite clearly what you wanted to do.
Yes, and I mean, we then wrote several drafts and rewrote and kind of shaped and added fantasy and did elements into it. But the core story of Tolkien, the core story that was in that first script that I read, is very beautiful. It's very empathic, and it's very poetic. And I cried the first time I read it, and then we just developed it into what it now is. I think because it builds who the Tolkien who we know is. So if I look at an interview that's done about him in the 60s by, and a TV interview, he's the older man looking his past, and there's a certain peace and wisdom in it. But to achieve that peace and wisdom, you've had to experience the turmoil that he did as a young man. The feelings of World War I, going with your friends into war, which is so essential. Basically the story, the battle between good and evil. So many elements that are so essential in his mythologies. So for us to see and understand mythologies, or his mythologies, or his character, this is the story, this is what built him. And that's why it's so essential, the time frame. I think what's beautiful about it's an eternal love story. It's eternal because Edith inspired Luthien, then inspired so many Elven ladies. And as the story, as it's depicted in the film, is first finding a friend. They're both orphans. They're both trying to find a home. They're trying to find belonging, and they find that belonging with each other. And it first grows into friendship, then it grows into love, then it's a forbidden love story, and then it becomes eternal love story. I think it feels weird that this story existed because it feels it's written for a movie. It's just like it almost like feels you can't invent that. If I would write that story, people would doubt, well, that's a bit too much. It's a bit too much movie-like. But here it's like it's actually happened in that whole epic essence. Well, I was an outsider also as a young man. I was bullied, and I grew up with a father that I got to know in a later life. I'm in late teens. And friends became vital and like maniacally important for me. And Tolkien had that, he wanted to form clubs. You kind of heal your outsider you with friends and the importance of them. And in this case, especially when he found friends that thought alike. They were very sensitive. They were artists in a patriarchal society. It's not toxic masculinity. It's supporting you and accepting you who you are. I think that's the ultimate and the beauty of friendship at its best. And then I said the tragic story of going to war with these people. Well, I just seen a couple of his films earlier. Like I remember a Sandcastle, kind of Netflix film, and Fox Searchlight had just worked with on The Favorite, which I heard good stories of. They said he's amazing in it, and it kind of felt like okay, he was the first kind of top of my list and top of everybody's list. And then I met him, and the script wasn't yet there, which like I felt like this is not yet the script I want to show him. So I didn't show them the script, which of course a bit weird because usually you read the script, you discuss about the script. I just wanted to talk to him, and we spent an hour and a half debating, discussing about life. And he has this intellect and wittiness, and he's very fast, but he's also warm and playful. And you feel these were all characteristics that I read from Tolkien. And then seeing his films, knowing his scale from Mad Max to, very, very comic setting, comic things also. And you know, okay, it's after that it felt like it has to be him. It just has to be him. And then we started fighting how we can get him from X-Men to fly over X-Men and to do this film. Well, I was auditioning different actresses at that time, and I was in England. I was doing location scouting. Lily lives in Los Angeles. So I had to Skype with her. And then there's this warmth, this explosion. Usually when you're in a Skype, it kind of distances you a bit from the person. There's kind of there's a glass wall, there's a concrete wall between you, but there's this explosive warmth about her that I felt that's Edith. That has been like, when I was 12 or 13, my first crush was an elven lady. It was Arwen, and it's Luthien. You have this elven lady in your mind. You want to be the wizard or you want to be the hero, but then you also want to fall in love with the elven princess. And then like Edith just embodies that. And then you watch Lily, who just embodies that. And you just knew that this is my elven princess.